Bien, buenos días.
Good
La Red
morning.
Latinoamericana
The
por
Red
Justicia Económica
Latinoamericana por
y
Justicia
Social
Económica y Social welcomes you to the seminar on assignment of special drawing rights, to save or to spend, where we will present the manual for the use of special drawing rights for tax purposes, prepared for Latindadd by the Ecuadorian economist Andrés Arauz. We believe that this manual constitutes a legal and an accounting conceptual contribution so that governments, especially those of the global south, such as Latin America, can use the resources derived from the next and imminent issuance of $650,000 million in special drawing rights that the International Monetary Fund will make this August 23rd, and that will be distributed proportionally among all its members. This has been possible, this issuance of $650,000 million in special drawing rights to distribute to the members of the Monetary Fund. To the member countries of the Monetary Fund, this has been possible after the hard work of political influence done by social organizations, thought centers, personalities of the academy, personalities of politics, and some governments. Since the pandemic began, we have asked that this aid mechanism to be applied because it was designed in the International Monetary Fund precisely for critical moments like this one. And what is more critical than the pandemic? Part of the last issuance was made in 2009 in the framework of the global financial crisis of the subprime crisis, and it was very fast. And here it has taken longer. Well, the special drawing rights to reach the central banks in August 23rd, and we do not want them to stay there. We do not want that to remain as an international reserves, as a position of exchange. It must be spent in the emergency that we live, must be directed to the victims. For this, first of all, we will have the words of the Bolivian economist Patricia Miranda, who will join us here. She is the Director of Global Advocacy for Latindadd and, well, one of the main actors in a concert of a global articulation to promote the emission of a special rights turnaround. It has been quite a hard work in the recent months and since the pandemic began. After these words, we will have the presentation of the manual itself, made by and presented by Andrés Arauz, who is here. He is a former Minister of Knowledge and Human Talent of Ecuador. He has also been the director of the Ecuadorian Central Reserve Bank. He has integrated the Monetary Board of Ecuador. He is very qualified to say and propose his options. And well, let us also remember that he, Andrés, has been a former presidential candidate of Ecuador in the last elections of this year. So, after these presentations and the options that Andrés Arauz is going to present to us, we will be able to collect all your questions and comments through the question and answer options, and they can also be seen by Andrea and by Patricia. We can see here, we can also relieve, and we will also give a second round to the panelists so they can also answer, clarify, and deepen these or complement these comments and concerns. My name is Carlos Bedoya, and I will be in charge of the moderation of this event. Without further ado, let us start. Patricia, please go ahead.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. 17 months have passed in the sanitary crisis, during pandemics. Oh, many crises have been caused, other systemic crises as well that happened before that. In the middle of this crisis, this global crisis, it's not the same. Developed economies had the capacity of spend 4 times more than emerging markets economies and 15 times more than low income countries. Advanced countries had access to recovery packages, billionaire packages, and we couldn't even imagine these uh, packages and how this recovery is progressing is a divergent recovery. I consider we should be more specific to describe how this recovery is. Apart from being divergent, it has a lot of inequalities. It's not inclusive. It's deepening inequalities, increasing proper poverty levels, and it is also a recovery that for many countries, particularly for regions as Latin America, is going to be longer, slower. This is a recovery which is leaving many people behind. Low income countries and medium income countries in general did not have access to monetary creation policies or financing to face this crisis. Before all these problems, as insufficient policies, there were a lot of demands for different actors, the civil society, governments, organizations, regional representatives, who are requesting access to resources without conditionalities, not creating more debts for countries which have this debt increasing trends. These demands from different actors, as I said, have stated among all these policies the issue of SDRs. This campaign lasted many months. Latindadd was part of this campaign, and along with other actors, for $3 billion in special drawings rights. Many international organizations have also stated the need of this liquidity for the world. The approval of these special drawing rights is a progress, but we feel that it's insufficient. It's not enough for this ine- inequality panorama. Only 60% of this allocation that will be given in August the 23rd will be for the more advanced economies. Big part of our countries do not need reserves. Our countries at this moment, in this context, need resources in their budgets to fight against the pandemics, for health purposes, and other needs that are urgent, not only the pandemics, but this multiple crisis we are all facing, which is the biggest crisis in more than 100 years. Special drawing rights are considered as a reserve assets. However, we consider that limit its use to this concept without identifying mechanisms which may allow the use of this allocation for um, other purposes is like shooting our foot. There is an urgent need in our countries, and the use of these resources for fiscal purposes may contribute to the recovery. So recovery is more equal for everyone. Latindadd, with Andrés Arauz and with all his experience, and having in mind that in 2009, in the previous allocation, there were other experiences from other countries which used these special drawing rights allocation for fiscal purposes. We feel that it is important to have a manual which states the different paths and mechanisms according to the countries, according to their needs, their regulations, and their priorities, especially for the ones, for these countries which need this emergency and which need these resources in their budgets. All of you who are following through Facebook, who are here connected, could help us to communicate all these thoughts or government policies so they make decisions in a convenient way to use these resources, and also to communicate this to congressmen, civil society, and other organizations, get this information so they know that all these mechanisms and they understand what is happening so countries make decisions and to follow up on the use of these resources. Thank you very much. Thank you, Patricia. I like how you put this. We don't need reserves at this moment, especially Latin America. We need fiscal resources to focus on the emergency, and the way out should be in the social aspect. Before passing the floor to Andres, I'd like to tell you that this manual, the handbook, is in English and Spanish version. It's in the chat box and also in the Latindadd site. Along these months and campaign, there have been a lot of materials, documents from forums, which are also available in Latindadd site. If you don't have all these elements on special drawing rights, you could refer to this handbook and all this material in our site. Now, I'd like to pass the floor to Andrés Arauz so he could present this handbook on the legal framework and other aspects. Please, Andrés, go ahead. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Patricia. Patricia, thank you for all this work we've been doing for 1 year. And also, I offer my sympathy at this moment. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who are listening to us. And thank you, Latindadd, too, for sharing with the world this topic, which is so transcendental. We're talking about $625 billion from the IMF. This is an important talk, and I'm pleased to share with the whole world the work we've been doing so far. Let me share with you these slides, which are going to help you understand what we were trying to communicate. We prepared this handbook for SDR, for fiscal purposes. We will use SDR, special drawing rights, and DEG, Derechos Especiales de Giro in Spanish. As Carlos and Patricia mentioned, the work we've been doing eh, has a lot of time. I'm sorry, this is going to be a more technical presentation. I'm sorry for the ones who are not in that area. And well, and we will also be complementing all this session with another session next week. During the pandemic, this hasn't finished yet. In many countries, normality is a reality, but in some other countries, it's not. Low rates of vaccination in some countries, new variants are also a threat, and the pandemic has 17 months in the world from the moment it was declared by the World Health Organization. Even on in March 12th, we called the IMF to allocate not only the amount they allocated, but 3 billion, 3 trillion, sorry, um, dollars. I'd like to thank many people who helped us from the political, economic matters from the United States. Even all these efforts, the allocation was done after 17 months and 7 months after the administration change in the White House. Maybe this happened because of this change after the Biden's administration was started. After 7 months, this happened. Many countries will receive these special drawing rights. As you can see on the screen, these are the amounts that were allocated to Latin American countries and the Caribbean countries. $1 million for Latin America, $51 billion, Latin America and the Caribbean. This is not authorized for Venezuela because there are some differences on who is exactly the leader of Venezuela at this moment. I hope the Venezuelan people could receive these $5 billion that could ease them to progress in the pandemic background. These are not the final figures, but they are close to the final holdings for each country. Here you can see that Brazil, Mexico, Venezuela, Argentina, and Colombia, it's the quantity is bigger for this region, but for other countries, the quantities are not that low. Let me remind you that the SDRs, as many other policies in the pandemic context, are coming with inequalities. They are allocated to rich countries, advanced economies, and the measures of central banks in developed economies, which has been a big difference on the path to the economic recovery in the north and in the south. Let me remind you that the pandemic was declared on March the 12th. There were some monetary issues, but the origin was not monetary. It wasn't a financial crisis. That's why the response could not be a monetary answer. It should have a, a fiscal solution through inclusion systems to reduce inequalities, promoting economic activity, reactivating the society. As you can see on the screen, this is the IMF, an IMF publication where we could see the amount of resources which were allocated to face the pandemic crisis in developed economies against or in contrast to low income countries. If in 2020 and 2021 we have more than 16% of the GDP of these other economies, the proportion of these other economic eh, is bigger than 4% of the GDP in emerging countries and less than 2% in low income countries. And apart from this, in advanced or developed companies, recovery is also covered in 2021 and 2022. But the efforts in emerging countries and low-income countries happened last year. This year, we don't have this boost as it existed last year. To this graph, I added the meaning of SDRs if it is not only a monetary measure, but an expenditure of the ministries in the countries. And this is what we could see in Latin America, in Latin American's case. This is a simulation of what the impact of SDRs will be in Latin American countries. It is a big contribution, a little bit more than 0.1 in the GDP, but it's not altering the structure of supporting measures that we could see on the graph on the screen. If rich countries would allocate these resources to other countries, this would be the impact. The expenditure will be a little bit more of these other countries. And I insist, this is not going to be used for fiscal purposes because they have access to their own monetary resources. Another important element to continue with this presentation is that SDR they are not an external debt. They are not external liabilities because we don't need to return them to the IMF. If countries do not change them in dollars, there isn't any obligation to return the SDRs to the IMF or to any other country, and there isn't any other obligation to pay for any interest rate for the exchanged SDRs. Now, if the country changes these SDRs and they receive dollars, they don't have any obligation to change these dollars to SDRs.
So far, they have not delivered the dollars to be able to receive the DEX. We're talking about more than 1 decade. So there is no obligation to do any of this. Having to give back the DEX or the dollars to be able to recover or receive. Now, what is the only thing that does happen is that when they exchange the DEX for dollars, the states incur in a small rate of interest that is paid every 3 months for the amount exchanged for 0.05%, not 5%. Let us not be confused. It is 0.05%. Okay, that means 5 basic points of interest rate, a yearly interest rate, which is obviously an amount that is a minimum amount that has nothing to do and no exchange, really, no change for the countries. And why do we have this discussion in this context? Because sadly, with the manual text that we have in the Bonanza for payments for some years ago, they decided to recommend that statistically speaking, not legally, not accountably, Now, just for statistics, they have to register this as an external debt. That means that there is inflation of the amount for the debt in the countries, and we know that this is a classification that is incorrect. And here we have Jorge, who has made the recommendation that statistically speaking, we're classifying this as debt, and clearly we have this in the manual. The 5th version of the manual was part of the statistical part, and this is in the purple area, so it is not considered and the fund and the countries that receive the debts are not incurring in anything, conditionally or non-conditionally. This is part of the debts. It cannot be clearer. It cannot be any clearer. There are no obligations of repaying the debt, so there is not part of the external debt. And this is fundamental to be able to understand the following steps. If you want this explanation, include the hyperlink in the lower corner on the right side. And now we're going to see what we're going to be using these special rights as. As Patricia has said, the other reserves, we have these, and there are some exceptions, but in general, the problem that we have in the region is not enough. There is an insufficient amount of fiscal resources to be able to understand the situation of the pandemic. And what does this blog say in the monetary fund? And there's a version in English, and if the general estimation says they have to complete it very quickly to be able to give these funds and help understand that we have special needs. And this is very important. This is something that was published in July 2021, last month, and it already says that the debts have to cover expense needs. It is very important in what it is that we are doing with this and the understanding that what we're doing. And where is this? The speaker for the monetary funds, international monetary funds, they have said this in a conference a few days ago. They say it's part of the reserve, but also part of the priorities in being able to support for better public policies. And again, there is a hyperlink on the part where there's an address there. And the director, the manager of the monetary fund, recently had a conference regarding the situation, the critical situation that is being lived in the country at this moment. And they said 860 million at this point will be received to be able to strengthen the very scarce funds and something that's permanent, and also to be able to support with the needs that the people of Lima have. This is a very valuable resource, and this should be used for the people and how to use it. And of course, this is a decision, it is a sovereign decision, and this is aligned with what the International Monetary Fund is having regarding the use of these international funds. And I'm very happy to know that this is aligned coincidentally with what we are proposing in this case. Something very important to know is that here we are not going to improvise. We have seen in the past, for example, when the debts were emitted in 2009, we already had a tax use for some countries, and there were no consequences that were negative. Between August 2020 and 2019, when there was the first line that we had in 2009, we had several countries that used the debts for fiscal reasons. In South America, it was my country, in Ecuador, Bosnia, Moldova, Serbia, and Ukraine. In Africa, it was Mauritania and Zimbabwe. And so what does this mean? There is a diversity of countries that we have used for fiscal paradise or fiscal areas, and there is no type of country that hasn't used it. It's different continents, there were different regions, different governments, and different ideological orientations, and they are placed in different parts of the planet with situations to have balances that are different. And this shows us that they can be used for fiscal reasons. This information has not been invented by me. This was gathered by the Treasury of the United States and also the International Monetary Fund. Consequences that we've had because of the use of this, there are none. It was clean, as the Monetary Fund had stated, when Ukraine used this for fiscal reasons. It was a relief. It was help to be able to solve essential problems that these economies have faced. On an international level, there are no prohibitions for the use, the fiscal use of these special rights. So, and so much so that for several years now, for several decades actually, the United States, Canada, and the UK are the ministries of finances, those that are owners of these special amounts, and they don't go to the central bank. They go directly to the ministries that are designated. And what does this show us? Not necessarily that we have to replicate how they use them, which is one of the options, but there are no international impediments. The agreements of the FMI, nothing prohibits the international use of these ministries and what they can do. And the best demonstration are these three countries. So together with these countries in the global south, or those that are emerging countries, those that are using the DEX for fiscal reasons, we also have these fiscal reasons that use the DEX from the financial ministry. We are now going to be reviewing the previous experience. We can see the case of Ecuador in 2009. In the case of Ecuador, the Ministry of Finances has given out a letter, a very simple letter, so you can see how simple it is to implement this, to the central bank a few days before the DEX come to the country, stating that the central bank, in the name of the Republic of Ecuador, not replacing it, in the name of the Republic of Ecuador, are making a procedure to be able to monetize and change for dollars, and then accredit the dollars for the current account of the Treasury. So that means the Ministry of Finances, so that it can be channeled through general budgets that the government has for the economy of the country. Now, this was the procedure that followed, and it was the central bank that received this communication. And at that moment, they were at the central bank, and we received the instruction on behalf of the Ministry of Finances, and we sent out the amount, and please to exchange them to dollars. They took a few days to be able to carry out that process. And then it came back from the central bank, from the exterior, and they are now accredited to the account for the Ministry of Finance. And they accredited these resources as capital and extraordinary resources, and they use it for budgetary reasons to be able to cover the amount that the Ministry of Finance has had for Ecuador. So some lessons learned from the Ecuadorian and they say the DEX belong to the Republic. They have the member countries simply as something that is exercising their titles, and they recommend this for the central bank, and the central bank as agents of the government of Ecuador proceeded to make these changes in the registry and the accreditation of the resources. So it is very important in the communication, in this case of Ecuador, which was for 3 days before the DEX reached and were assigned to the different countries. On what for? So that the central banks receive the rights that they have on the 23rd of August in the next week, and for them to have clear instructions on behalf of the government of what to do with these resources. Now, this same method is being currently applied by Paraguay. The Paraguay government gave this project of a law in the month of June, and they are about to approve it in the Paraguay Congress. They are now working on this project and they hope to achieve this very soon. And it's going to be approved. And as you can see, they have the same orientations of communication that the Ministry of Finances has given in the central bank. And basically, it's stating that the debts that are going to be received or coming in have to be assigned to the public treasury, and that the Ministry of Finances and the Hacienda are going to be having access, obviously, with the authorized transactions, and it's going to be exchanged into dollars. In the case of Paraguay, my consideration is that the project of the law is positive, but I believe it's unnecessary because simply interpreting that the agreement in favor of the countries was enough for the Ministry of Treasury of Paraguay instruct how to proceed with the special rights. But they're doing it because, well, sometimes the central bank, they know the special rights are part of the reserve, and that's why they belong to the central bank. And the Paraguayan government adopted by this option to be able to avoid any sort of questions or insecurities, jurisdictional insecurities that come from the Central Bank of Paraguay. And in my opinion, it's unnecessary, but it's positive because it really points towards the fact that the debts can be for taxation reasons, or can go for taxation reasons. So the debts in the member countries and the agreements. And here we can easily find in the internet the FMI agreement, where in Article 15, the special rights are defined. And it says that they have the faculties to be able to designate this. And you can see very clearly here that the assignment is for the member countries and the republic. And in the same way, those that are giving sovereign emissions have the Ministry of Finances. And in the same case, the debts belong to the republic of the Ministries of Finance. And the bank is part of this, and it doesn't replace the republic in this international treaty. And they describe the assets that are part of these international reserves, but they do not describe or organize or are not part of this exclusive part of the assets. And here we have to explain this point because a lot of countries state, no, but in the monetary law, they say that internationally speaking, it is gold or the dividends. And this doesn't mean that this originally means that it is part of the central bank. It can be part or not part of private, public finance. And they have to deposit them in the central bank. And after they have done this, they become assets. And it's the same with a gold link. Does all the gold in the country belong to the central bank? No, some of them are in private banks. Some of the lingots are in people's safes and their jewelry. And I hope that when they deposit the monetary gold in the central bank, this then becomes an asset for international well-being. And here, this is part of the republic. When the republic decides to deposit or to manage this in the central banks, and then it becomes part of the international reserves. And this doesn't mean that the original proprietary is the central bank. Now, when the ministry manages the debts in the central bank, they cover both goals. It goes up, internationally speaking, and they definitely have these special rights. But apart from that, they have also been incorporated to the fiscal rights. And this allows us and the governments to be able to have a very specific answer to the billions of Latin American citizens need. And I believe that the recommended issue is that the ministry should be sending instructions to the central banks, preferably before the 23rd of August, so that when the resources come in the next week, the central bank should know what to do with these resources. And here I prepared a guide, an accountable guide, which is very quick, and we don't have a lot of time to go into detail on this, but very simply speaking, in the right-hand corner, you can see that the rights are given by the Department of the DEX, and they are then created, and we have this, and 680 rights for 84 million in a special amount, and they create assets in the central bank in the left side, and this exchange for dollars, here we have minus 380, and they receive over $50, and this moment is where they have this for the deposits with $950 million. The Ministry of Finance at this point in time creates an asset which is millions in the account of the central bank, and then they have the income of this capital of millions of dollars in the patrimony in the Ministry of Finances, and this has gone up in $950 million. And what can we see here? There is no debt. There is no external debt. There is patrimony of the Republic, and here we have the raise in the capital, and then in the next accountable exercise, and we can spend this for fiscal reasons. And alternatively speaking, the Ministry of Financing is receiving this, and they are accredited in the Ministry of Finance, and they become patrimony, and then they decide to deposit this. And in the second moment, they can then ask for an exchange. There are several accountable resources to be able to register it. The second mechanism is that which the United States, Canada, and the UK are exercising, and this is part of what they have in the fund. So they receive the debt in the Treasury, and here, if the Ministries of Finance in the United States, which is called the State Department, if they need dollars, and they then sell new papers, which are called debt certificates, and they go to the central bank, and this is part of New York, and then they receive dollars in their account. And the same design is applied in Canada and the UK. And more than it being a model that we would like to replicate in Latin America, here the ministries have to be those that own these special rights. And the accountable move here is part of the exercise of the emission, which is approximately 100 million in special rights and certificates. And this is what is going to allow us to have access to these dollars in the ministry. And well, a third spot or a third road is extraordinary dividends. And this is a scenario in which we need and we understand that DEX are part of the central bank. This sometimes happens because of political reasons, where sometimes the central banks are acting autonomously, and they say, even though the Ministry of Finance is instructing us, we're not going to go down that path. I have no intention to give these special rights, and my intention is that this does not belong to the Republic. This is part of the central bank, but I am available and understanding, in which we understand that my position belongs to the central bank. We're going to try and find the way to have this go into the finance department or ministry, and this is just a matter of accounting. If this comes into the central bank, if they don't want to hand over or is disputed, then it is enough for the central bank to register that these debts are an income, and it is an extraordinary income in this result. It's as if gold has rained from the sky, and this is extraordinary, and this is part of the bank, the central bank. And once we've had this, we've had reserves that are extraordinary, and this belongs to the Ministry of Finance. And when we have finished the year, the central bank can transfer this as part of the dividend in the Ministry of Finance. And in this way, we are complied with the goals. If there is a political will, we can update the dividends in September of this same year. And they say, okay, well, we have received this and it is not previewable to have any sort of losses. And well, we have 2022 and we're going in this year. And in this way, the ministry can have this amount, which is an immediate amount. And this is a little bit of this move. And again, the decks first go into the central bank, and this is part of the balance of the ministry. And once the fiscal year has come in, when they have these extraordinary dividends, the patrimony of the central bank is going down because they're paying the dividends. And this Ministry of Finances can be used for the budgetary issues. And once we have this mechanism, it is part of where the central bank is, and they don't want the DEX to be not part of the balance. And we know that the ministry is part of this, and the country has received this money, and we're going to be giving finance with part of this central bank. And many of these are not allowed, and in some they have and some they don't, and these are exceptional. And once the central bank is giving this financing to the ministry without touching the DEX, but with an additional amount which is equivalent, and as we have suggested and as Patricia has said, it has to be in similar conditions to what has been received, which is very similar to the rate of 0.05%. And this is an indefinite amount, and this is part of the special right. But this would imply going up, internally speaking, between the ministry and the central bank, and this is internal financing, which is given by the public sector and the financial sector. And you can see the accounting figure and also the conclusions. And we do not have this international amount. And this is very clear for the DEX that belong to the country that are member countries, and these are members of the Republic, and the Republic are the ministries. And the DEX have been used as a fiscal instrument in the United States, Canada, and the UK. They have already done this in different countries, in Africa and the UK, and this is nothing strange in what we're proposing today. The Constitution has or have been primed, and this is one of the paths. And we have to remember that the monetary laws that are detailing the composition of the external reserves are misused as an argument in the central banks to be able to confuse this originary type of assets, internationally speaking. And here we have to be very clear in the fact that we are not removing anything from the central bank. We are depositing the resources in the central bank, such as what we have said. When a country is receiving a loan from the monetary fund, and then they have the Ministry of Finances, and this is what we're saying now. It's important for the governments and those that are present here to represent the central bank, and for them to have this, and that the ministries have to act quickly and to anticipate the central bank and what it is that they have to do to be able to access these resources in my country. And based on these public declarations, the Ministry of Finances is acting, anticipating, to be able to replicate what has been done in 2009. And the President of the Republic, Mr. Guillermo Lasso, has publicly stated that this is part of the budget, the state budget. And specifically speaking, as an investment, in some countries, we have the DEX to pay for this. And this corresponds to the sovereign amount for each country. And these are the priorities or legislations that are still current. And we recommend for this to be destined to recovering, both socially and others, to be able to confront the terrible consequences that the pandemic has left on our society. this is accountable, technical, etc., to be able to use these resources that have taken so long to give, and this is to have this favorable account for the economies and the population. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andres, and we congratulate you for this work, and we would like to thank you for this. Conceptually speaking, this is very good, and both for legal, technical, and accountable to be able to turn these decks into help during the pandemic. Be part of the fiscal resources. And I would like to thank Patricia Miranda and Andres, Patricia, for having had this magnificent idea of initiating this technical debate for the use of DEX for now and for the future as well. A lot of our companions have been part of this for a very long time. And well, before having gathered or been part of these questions, well, I would like to point out that the PowerPoint that Andres has is going to be part of this chat. It's going to be published now. It's going to be placed now for the participation of all of you. And also tomorrow at 12 Peruvian time, Andres is going to be giving an interview in America TV describing these mechanisms. And so for whoever would like to go deeper into this subject and perhaps go to different people that can be informed, tomorrow there's going to be an interview in social media, Telesur, and this is going to be at 12 Peruvian time, and they're going to be interviewed. So this is going to be part of Telesur in Peru. And we're going to go to the questions. And well, the first one, procedure to be able to change the DEX from dollars. And well, we are going to be looking at this and we're going to remember it. And the other thing is the use, also Christina's question, in the context of the pandemic, if we can have a certain amount to be able to reach these 3 million that we have requested as a civil society. And another thing is what Peter said, well, we're going to invent this fake amount or fake sort of currency with future dividends and then emit this, and that way the DEX are left in the reserve, and it's kind of like a Bitcoin but better. This is another path that we are suggesting, which is another path just in general. And can the central bank, and this has been accredited internationally speaking, if they don't do what you have said before being emitted, then what is the path to be followed? Or this accountable operation, if you are already accrediting this as part of the reserve? And then, well, in what Peter has said regarding this mechanism here, Andres can see it. And I would also like to point out a question, which is a sixth path, which is what Peter has said. This is a Peruvian way. Here we have a central bank, which is very autonomous, very, very autonomous. And it's not just constitutionally autonomous, but also in the common sense. Given that we have had a trauma and the, well, hyperinflation in the 80s and at the end of that decade, so the central bank is very careful with these resources. And if any of these that you have proposed is something that we can do in these countries, and this is part of what a central bank has, maybe we can come into the system and, let's say, go into the international economy through financial resources. And here we have made a very large program, which is called Reactiva, 60 million soles, 60 billion soles. And this is part of what the state has done with resources that we have had. So perhaps, together with the leverage, financial leverage, we can make this option grow and what we have in the country in Peru. So Andres, what do you think of this Peruvian path where the bank, the central bank, is now placing resources through the financial area and through this interest, and it can be oriented towards food and other issues of family, or also reactivating the economy, or different purposes that we have due to the economy. Well, these are the questions, and well, thank you very much, and just to say hi in the chat, and then we're going to be going, I don't know if there are any questions, any more questions than those that we already have. Oh, and a question. Yes, if we can, in the countries that don't need the DEX, or those that have too much money, or those that cannot emit any currency, like England, United States, Canada, can they donate or place this or designate in any way, give these DEX, or would there be enough for those countries that are developing countries? Here we have the station, and the DEX are part of sort of a fund that is renewed. Is it a renewable? And Christian, hope I've heard of cases in Africa where the central banks are only giving the DEX to the Ministry of Finances as loans, not as constitutional rights. And they're saying the DEX can avoid the sort of loans that are being proposed. And well, these are the questions. And if you see any new ones, and there's a Patricia, then you can also answer these, and in the same order for this final round. So Patricia, Miranda, and then, well, Mr. Arauz. Oh, thank you very much, Andrés. And well, this is very clear to all of us at this point. I should mention that the situation of our countries, we have medium income, and they have had very little access for these global initiatives. Countries that have medium access are outside of these initiatives to be able to face this crisis. So this emission and assignment is an opportunity and help for these countries that are receiving very little or almost nothing. And apart from that, as what has been said by Andrés, this is without debt. And this is a new wave of debt. And more so in the context in that the majority of our countries have had fiscal deficits before the pandemic, and we have a very significant amount in the fiscal amounts. And so these mechanisms can be used, and they have been very well explained by Andrés, and they are very important in our countries for the population, for a benefit for the population, to be able to save lives. And this is not something that is just left here, and somebody has mentioned this is part of follow-up. And well, this is transparency, transparent about the use, and this can be used for fiscal reasons. And there's a second phase, and this is what happens for the assignment in the developed countries. And this is part of the current. The demand is that these resources can be transferred for the countries that need these to be able to face this multiple crisis. And these is something very highly concession, and the mechanisms are funds. And for this context, don't have this conditionality, and in this way, this doesn't have the previous conditions that Destiny says that we should, and we have different opportunities. And well, we are reaffirming this in each country, and we have the decision and the priorities for the use of these resources. And the countries each have their own needs. And last but not least, we know that this is one way and one path towards showing that there are other ways of channeling the resources with these conditions, with fairer ways, and to begin to restart these needs of transforming the monetary funds, the current monetary funds, and also the global monetary funds that we are all considering. Thank you very much. Thank you, Patricia. And well, Andres has the floor at this moment. I don't know if they would like to say something right now, but Andres, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Carlos. And well, there are a series of questions. I'm going to try to answer them the best that I can, but tending mostly to some of the practical concerns that we can identify. And perhaps the first question that I would like to answer is that of Jorge Coronado. Can they be part of the National Reserve and then transferring this amount to the ministry for the budgetary expense, or is this something that cannot be done? Well, it's not something that cannot be done, but there is a principle which is very highly technical principle in financing, and it says the lizard that swallows doesn't vomit. And what does this even mean? It means that once it's part of the patrimony of the central bank, it's very difficult for it to be transferred to the Ministry of the Treasury, and they might say, well, these resources are mine, and then the central bank is going to proceed. And well, this is almost a very easy way of responding to Jorge, but the third way, the income of DEX, is then a viable way to have this as a budgetary expense. And we have this income, which is an extraordinary income, part of the bank, and this is going to be transferred to the Ministry of the Hacienda, or Ministry of Treasury. And we can also consider an accountable agreement where the communication that is part of the Hacienda and also central bank, which is simply making a correction for the procedures to a previous and then proceeding to credit this to the Ministry of Hacienda, and then they are correcting. It's just something that's slightly more difficult, and if they are reuniting or saying this, we are then crediting the resources to the Treasury. And there is also a question, DEX are part of this rotation, and well, no, it is not a rotating fund. It is simply an assignment that is made just once. They are assigning these to the countries, and then the countries have to figure out what they're doing with them. And if they decide to change it for dollars, there is a small fee, there is a small interest rate, but it is not a rotating fund that then has to be repaid, necessarily speaking. If a country would like to repay this and have very little interest, and that is fine, but there is no obligation to do so. So if the countries, such as what Peter is suggesting, Peter Torreyani is suggesting, they decide to save these, and based on this to then emit these other titles or values as what the proposal 4 is stating, or whatever Carlos is saying for Peru, then it is also possible, but then it's not very necessary to necessarily sell these special rights in exchange for dollars. They can stay in the balance, and if there are enough funds in the central bank, then they can then circulate these new instruments, these monetary instruments within the economy, and then have the DEX just part of this backup in the case of the need, this external need of the balance. So we have this mechanism, and we have this as a fiscal mechanism. We're talking about bank credits, financial situations, circulating these values, etc. This is more for the productive economy. And well, the orientation of this manual is for the use of fiscal reasons or taxation reasons. So there is now a proposal from Georgina Barong that states that it is possible to demand a new amount for special rights to be able to invest in health. And yes, it is not only important or possible, it is a need. It is a real need to renovate this, to renew this. And we've said this from the beginning when we say 650 billion for DEX that have been emitted. Sadly, this is a very tricky amount because 2/3 of this amount is going towards the richest economies in the country, and the only thing that they're going to do is going to say, oh, thanks, and left everything right there in the decks without having used them for any sort of reason. So the true emission that has happened or that will happen on Monday is about 250 billion for the countries that are lower income, and these are those that can give some sort of right to these special amounts. And we have an emission that is much larger for 3 trillion in English, and well, we have at least this amount that has been approved in the Congress of the United States, and that would need these last steps to be able to at least reach $2 trillion in these special amounts. And this is a magnitude that is slightly closer to the true needs that we have in the planet. And why is this discussion important? Because we understand that the monetary fund in the United States, we have the power to veto, and they are foreseeing this and they cannot emit it. So the Congress in the United States has as a preponderance to be able to make this happen. And there is where there can be a lot of effort on behalf of civil society and also networks and friends and people that are concerned about humanity in general for this to be able to happen as soon as possible in the North American Congress. Veronica is now answering a question what the procedure is to be able to change X for dollar, who is purchasing and what for. And well, the procedure is basically administrative procedure showing that as the Ministry of Finance is stating, they're asking the central bank to act in this way. And then the central bank is sending a communication through SWIFT to the DEX and the monetary fund, which is the International Monetary Fund. And this fund is then receiving the SWIFT, and they are then instructing for the DEX and exchanging the DEX for dollars. And we have a series of calls, such as a broker for the different countries in the world. I believe that 20 countries are then qualified to the DEX. In Ecuador, Costa Rica, Chile, and whatever. And they're interested in purchasing DEX instead of dollars. And the countries are then answering within an approximate amount of time. And they say, okay, well, I'm interested. And then they can sell their dollars. And then they will be receiving DEX in exchange. And what is the reason that these countries can do this? China, United States, Britain, Libya, those moments, or in other moments, is that they can have special rights in this balance so that they can then gain this rate in dollars is at least, well, it's negative in certain cases or in some. And even these 5 points, which is an adequate amount or adequate interest, and this is part of the composition of these international reserves, and this is also a goal. So this is the mechanism through which the DEX are being exchanged for dollars, and the amount that these DEX have to be able to pay for this in dollars, to be able to exchange this. And this is part of the world economy, and there is no problem for this to be able to sell their DEX on an international level. The Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund, and this is something that many countries have asked for, which is more than 80 in real time. Instead of looking for dollars or using dollars, they can use this for special amounts. And this is something that is an option that we have in countries that we are now verifying, and we believe that this can be used for the emission or social emission, and this is any of these cases truly. And a couple additional questions is that, well, in Ecuador, the law for the defense is going to be replacing or representing a law, which is part of the mechanisms that can be used, and they're similar to 2009. Yes, they can be similar to what is done in 2009, and I don't really see any sort of block here unless there is a different purpose. And at the beginning, there was sort of like an objection given that the current representative, the president of this joint task force, they had commented that the DEX belongs to the central bank. And I don't know if they maintain that position currently, but as we have said, President Lasso has said that they're going to be using it for budgetary reasons. And this is sort of an indication that further than ideological or this left-wing ideas, there's a mechanism that is clearly shown that they can be implemented if we are doing this in a sort of left wing. And it's now a right wing, and it is perfectly legally legitimate, and it's going to be proceeding to destine these to the different countries, the different instances that need them in the countries. And if we know that there are percentages that we have to use for fiscal reasons, taxing reasons, then no, this is not a concept that we have. It's important that in the country is not used to pay the international instances. This is something that would be absurd and very painful for at least our countries. The money having come in has to be paid internationally speaking, and well, it should be used for us to have this as part of health and education. And this is part of what we have in Ecuador. And well, I believe that I have tried to answer most of the questions. They're also suggesting that in Germany, this should be complicated to implement, but we have the access to this finance, and this is part of the European Central Bank. And well, truly, the amount of DEX is very small for the size that they have, but it is very important in regards to what we see in lines of the development in the rest of the world. So what is the role of civil society at this point? Well, the role of civil society is first to be able to share this information. And what we have talked about today is managed sort of like a secret, internationally speaking. It's very cryptic, it's very blurry. They state that there are DEX, but they don't say how it is that we can use them. And perhaps this is the first time in history that we are openly discussing how we can place the DEX to be used for budgetary or fiscal reasons. And in this sense, we can open this information and share the transparency, and for them to have this known. And it's just very important, and do this as quickly as possible to be able to communicate this to the Ministry of Hacienda so they can give this to the banks, and also to propose the great challenges that we have. How it is that we're going to be recycled, donate, transfer the DEX that we have in the richer countries that are not going to be used towards the countries that are developing countries, and how we can have a larger emission of those that have been managed to be able to face the largest magnitude that has flow towards the south, and to begin to use these mechanisms, not just for the richer countries or the countries in general, but those that are going to be destined towards global funds. And this is climate change, eradication of being those that can get rid of hunger and all these other fundamental things that we have. Okay, Andrés, thank you very much. And I would like to thank you for this very clear presentation. And well, this is part of the consecutive amounts, or the sort of policies and the mechanism that is perhaps used by the United States, Canada, or England. These are part of those that are emitting the DEX, and we have the high dividends, and we have the external debt, and all of these cases that we have pointed out, to be able to show these DEX in fresh money, to be able to cover what the pandemic has. And we really appreciate everything, Patricia, Miranda, We have those that are the representatives of Latindadd. Thank you very much, Patricia. And well, we have all of our allies in the different organizations in the United States and Europe and Asia and the Middle East and Africa, everyone who has worked very hard in Latin America to be able to emit this. And our work is not over, it continues. And we're inviting everyone that is present here, that is listening to this, that can reach, and if they have the possibility in the ministries of economy and the central bank to have this information and to discuss this in general, then we can do this on behalf of civil society. And also to state that starting tomorrow on the webpage of Latindadd, you can see that online on the page where we have a W at the end, just so you know. We are going to have this available, and there's a special section which is visible on the front page, and then we're going to have all of this information there. And well, we're going to have these interviews, we have the videos, the documents, the declarations, and all of the information. And well, we have the manuals to be able to share this. And so, well, having said that, I would like to just state that we really thank everything that has been done. And well, we have this, and we have started the fight for those that are in higher need in general. So thank you very much. And well, that is it. Well, having said that, Latin American Network for Economy and Social, we would like to thank the presence of every one of you. And well, until the next time, thank you, Andrés. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, everyone.